Week 9 was one where a lot of predictable things happened. If you were paying attention for DFS, it was probably a pretty good week for you, and hopefully it was a profitable week. What we're going to do here today is break down each game so far, talk about the usages, snap rates, and injury snow, and what it all means going forward as we take a look forward at Week 10 and beyond. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, another Dalvin Cook week. We saw Seattle-Buffalo shootout as predicted. How you doing?
Good. It was a pretty good week of football. The primetime game last night made it so that I could kind of shut off stuff a little bit early for once and just kind of figure it out in the morning. But the whole, afternoon slate of games felt good. A lot of good production from players that we were kind of in on. Even some of the more tertiary plays, like a Jerry Jeudy. These guys that we're trying to use to round out our lineups, not necessarily building around. Kind of a lot of hits there. The big one for me is that Chase Edmonds. I'll talk about his amazing workload, but didn't score, so that really kind of held me back personally.
Well, between Edmonds and Locket, things could have been very poor, but because of how good Dalvin Cook, Josh Allen, DK Metcalf, John Brown, Stefan Diggs didn't score, but they were still good options. And Christian McCaffrey, because we talked a lot on Thursday about all those guys. At least for me, it made up for the fact that I had a lot, 73% of Chase Edmonds and a lot of Tyler Lockett. Yeah. It didn't matter as much because the ceilings were so good there. And I think that kind of reinforces the thought that you need to emphasize ceiling because you're going to mess up. You're going to roster Chase Edmonds when he doesn't have a touchdown or Tyler Lockett when it's, a David Moore type of slate or whatever. Those mistakes are going to happen. You need to have guys who can make up for that. And I think that this kind of reinforced that our emphasis on upside versus floor.
Yeah, we talked about J.K. Dobbins on the recap show and kind of a little bit on Thursday. And he's just a perfect example of someone who, the salary's low enough and you can spend up elsewhere. But what you're really doing is saying that you're confident enough that, you're going to hit on, even if we exclude defense, your 7 other position players. And it's really difficult. And that's why you kind of need to have the mindset that everyone you roster has a path to kind of carry your lineups because you're not going to hit on everybody. Even if Chase Edmonds plays 96% of the snaps, gets all the work, he was fine, but he didn't carry you. And you need to make sure that you're getting guys who do carry your lineups whenever everything doesn't go according to plan, which is basically how NFL DFS works. Very rarely goes exactly according to plan.
Yeah, you need mistake maker uppers. That's definitely a good phrase. That was well thought out beforehand. You were talking for a bit there, and I could have thought of a better word to use for it, but I didn't. So you need guys who can make up for mistakes elsewhere, and I think this is a good week to reinforce that. Hopefully, it was a good week for all of you as well. Let's dive in here to the recap of week number 9, starting off on Thursday night. Kind of a P show here because everyone was on the COVID list. And no one could play. So I don't know how many takeaways we can actually have from this game outside of the fact that Aaron Rodgers is still really good, and the 49ers have a lot of question marks with all those injuries.
Yeah, I think that's the real takeaway. It just wasn't a very competitive game. The 49ers got decimated, but you could kind of anticipated that with what their roster looked like entering this game. It ended 34-17, but was 31-3 entering the fourth quarter. Aaron Jones returned here and was expected to be somewhat limited, but he played 61% of the snaps, handled 15 carries and 5 targets, which works out to 25 adjusted opportunities, which is something we'll cite throughout the show. For us, adjusted opportunities is 15 carries plus 2x targets, because a target on FanDuel for running back works out to about twice as many expected FanDuel points. Something Jim made up. I don't want to take credit for it, but we both cite it a lot. So
it's a very imprecise term. You can say it. I don't care.
But yeah, 25 adjusted opportunities is pretty solid. That'd be about 8th or so on the full season among running backs per game. But he didn't score, but was involved. There's no reason to think that he won't be kind of Aaron Jones, the Aaron Jones of old. with 10 days of rest before their game against the Jaguars next week. So for me, the arrow's back up on Aaron Jones. And there's really no reason to be concerned about Tyler Ervin's involvement. He had 8 carries and 5 targets, but in the first half, just 3 carries, 3 targets, 33% of the snaps overall. So again, Aaron Jones, treating him as I did before the injury now. Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example of why efficiency is better than volume for quarterbacks. He had 4 touchdowns, almost 10 yards per attempt on 31 attempts. It's hard to predict efficiency, but we know that Aaron Rodgers has that kind of game. He has the ability to put up multiple touchdowns on very few pass attempts, and that is what leads to upside for quarterbacks. It's the touchdowns. It's not really the yardage or just the raw dropbacks. And Devontae Adams is he retained the wide receiver 1 role, not just on the Packers, but in the NFL overall. He had 12 of 31 targets for 173 yards and a touchdown. The running backs, Jones and Irvin, each had 5 targets, and then Marquez Valdes-Scantling had 4. Nobody else had more than 1. And this is just really what you've come to expect from the Packers in terms of pass catching. It's Devontae, and then really nobody else reliable. MVS did play 89% of snaps, but he's got an 11% target share in 5 games shared with Devontae Adams fully healthy, while Adams is at 36% in that sample. They host the Jaguars next week, so hopefully the Jaguars can keep it somewhat close, but that spread is 14 points at the open on FanDuel Sportsbook.
They're just sleeping on Jake Luton. How dare they? Well, we wouldn't.
Yeah, we did not. We'll talk about him. Never. The 49ers offense was not – I mean, look, they were without George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Tevin Coleman, and Jimmy Garoppolo, but, I don't know what the difference is between Garoppolo and Mullins at this point. I like Garoppolo, but he's been a lot of a letdown, even though he's been efficient. It's just been a really strange season for the 49ers. And
I feel like they should just start CJ Beathard so we can at least feel really good about defenses facing them. We can get something positive out of fantasy out of this.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
CJ Beathard is like Daniel Jones on steroids when it comes to taking sacks. It's amazing.
Someone I never talked about, but I liked coming out because he dominated a bunch of games at Middle Tennessee. But Richie James came out and had a big game. 13 targets, 184 yards, and a touchdown. 5 of those were downfield, which for us is at least 16 yards downfield. It's not nothing, but Ayuk should be back next week. Deebo Samuel could be back for Week 10, same as Raheem Mostert. So, what we saw on Thursday could be very different. And this team's had so much fluctuation in their skill position players that it's really hard to put your finger on how they want to use anybody aside from, when George Kittle's healthy, they want to get him the ball. They want to get Brandon Ayuk the ball, but that's about it. And then in the backfield, Jerick McKinnon had 12 of 16 running back carries, 4 targets, played 74% of the snaps after playing 12 snaps the week prior due to tired legs. So I don't know. I mean, if Mostert comes back, he's going to be the best bet in the backfield, but I still don't really like to play Raheem Mostert whenever they have additional options. So honestly, I might just be in on Brandon Ayuk and nobody else in this offense. They play the Saints next week in New Orleans, so at least it's a dome game.
Yeah, I think the good thing with Mostert is at least that they don't have as many dudes they did in the past, because they clearly didn't want to use Michael Hasty. They are not super inclined to have big snaps for Jerick McKinnon, so I think that is at least better. I agree with you on Aaron Jones. I think that's interesting. I hope they get Alan Lazard back next week. That could be kind of interesting, but pretty status quo for the Packers, which is always a good thing for sure. In the week 9 of the FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League, A-Swaim 3 took it down with a score of 164.0. They had Josh Allen stacked with John Brown, Dalvin Cook, and DJ Chark's big days helped move the needle too. So congratulations to A-Swaim 3. Don't spend it all in one contest, or do, I don't really care. Do your thing. The week 10 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League should be posted later on Monday. As always, you can get in by going to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. It is a $5 entry with 3 entries max. We've also got a PGA Listener League for the Masters. That's kind of exciting. Which you can enter by going to FanDuel.com/league/PGA Listener League. That's all one word. FanDuel.com/league/PGA Listener League. We're going to have a podcast on the Masters from a DFS perspective today at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. Make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page to get a notification as we go live. Otherwise, I'm posted on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after. So, Masters podcast, Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern, YouTube, FanDuel, what other key buzzwords can I get in there? Whatever. Subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. The Listener League, FanDuel.com/league/PGA Listener League. The NFL one, FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. Eligibility restrictions apply. Happy Masters Week. Are you wearing a Masters hat right now?
No, it is the players, and I just realized, for anybody not watching the video, I'm wearing a U.S. Open T-shirt and the player.
Do you have any Masters gear?
No. I've looked into the hats. They're not really my style.
Can you get like a cheap sandwich or something you can bring in memory of Augusta?
No.
I think it's like a cheese sandwich.
I didn't. No.
Have you had a cheese sandwich before?
What is?
Like a sandwich that just has cheese on it?
Yeah, it's my go-to at Sheetz.
Okay.
I have a very limited range of.
I suppose Sheetz is probably not the most vegetarian-friendly place either.
Yeah, I'm very limited with what I can do. So the cheese sub is a go-to at Sheetz.
They have a good chicken tender sub too. I miss Sheetz dearly. Let's move on to Seattle at Buffalo, which lived up to all the hype we had around it. It played out as the shootout we thought it could be, even the touchdowns didn't really break the way we wanted, but it was a great bounce back for Josh Allen. This helps confirm that he was not broken, as we suspected. He just had bad circumstances, whether it be lopsided matchups or tough weather, tough matchups, whatever it was. It wasn't his fault. It was just bad circumstances. So whenever Allen is in a projected tight game with a non-threatening matchup, he is one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in the league, and they get Arizona next week. That game's going to be gross. Stefan Diggs and John Brown both hit value without a touchdown. You want more raw points out of them, but doing as much as they did without a touchdown is super impressive. Brown is fully back to being in play, even if he is a good chunk below Diggs. Also a revenge game next week. So they're not going to have matchups as good as this one in the future, but they are back to where they were the first part of the year, where both of them are very in play, favoring Diggs for sure, but Brown, the lower cost alternative. The Bills ran just 19 times here. Pete Carroll said he was surprised, which means he didn't look at the Bills' offense in the first 8 weeks because they've been throwing a lot the entire year. They had 45 dropbacks, so not a ton to see here from the running backs. Zach Moss had 9 carries and 2 targets. Devin Singletary, just 2 carries and 3 targets. Moss played 56% of the snaps, which is a season high, so he keeps separating from Singletary, but not enough to target him in DFS. He is a guy to monitor, not a guy to use as of now. Defensively, especially with DeAndre Hopkins looming, it's worth noting that Tre'Davious White had an ankle injury and did not return. It looked kind of weird. If he misses time, it would upgrade outside receivers facing the Bills, so keep an eye on that for Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins next week. We had, again, debated Locket versus Metcalf, and Metcalf was the winner this time. His touchdown, though, did come after Tre'Davious White got hurt. Metcalf had 9 targets to Lockett's 7. Metcalf had 1 additional deep target. I'm not going to change things too much here. I think you can still go with Lockett when he definitely has the better matchup, and Metcalf in every other situation. So if it's close, go Metcalf. If it's not, go Lockett. No change for me there. I had talked a bit about Will Dissly this week. We can abandon that completely. Hopefully none of you listened to that. He had just 1 target compared to 7 for Jacob Hollister. They rotated in Greg Olsen, Jacob Hollister, Will Dissly, so it's probably wise to ignore everyone here except Metcalf and Lockett, and that does include David Moore as well. The Seahawks were super committee-esque in the backfield. DJ Dallas had 7 carries and 2 targets. Travis Homer had 6 carries and 3 targets. Alex Collins mixed in for some 2-minute drill. It kind of seems like a backfield to avoid until Chris Carson is back. Brandon, I want to talk to you about this Bills offense, specifically the wide receivers. We have John Brown finally showing life again. So name that salary for John Brown next week against Arizona.
I used him this week. What was he, 55?
55.
This feels like one where you might be higher on him and I might be a little low, but it still is John Brown. But and I don't mean anything by that. I just mean that I'm still going to pump the brakes a little bit. Probably like 61.
That's the exact same number I had in my mind. I think that's a very good number because it's not like super prohibitive. It's not fully in the mid-range, but it's high enough to respect the role he has. And he's $5,600 again.
Yeah.
So I think it's a week where we just run it back.
Yeah. I mean, especially, I haven't looked at the slate, obviously, that much. But just a quick glance at running back. We have Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones. So we're going to need some value.
We need to spend down, yeah.
Because we
especially
saw
with Stefan Diggs likely seeing Patrick Peterson. Like, that's not the toughest matchup in the world anymore, but like, it's enough to downgrade him a bit. And I think that we should be pretty happy to take that discount.
And Arizona's other cornerback, I think Kevin Peterson, got hurt this week.
So just another week of load up on the Bills versus the NFC West team and go from there. And we'll also load up on the other game that Seattle's in next week because it involves Jared Goff off a bye. What could go wrong? Let's move now to Denver at Atlanta. Drew Lock played like poo the entire first part of the game, but just like in week 8, he rallied to help some Broncos guys pay off. But no Calvin Ridley here for the Falcons. So what'd you see here, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, the final score was close because Drew Lock mounted somewhat of a comeback, but 21 fourth quarter points is always going to be a little bit misleading for how the game actually went, which is what the Broncos scored. But I think the big thing here for the Falcons is that they did play without Calvin Ridley, which they haven't really done just the past 2 weeks. Ridley got hurt early on Thursday night in week 8, and then they played without him in week 9. But I mean, the offense still got it done. Matt Ryan put up 284 yards. 3 touchdowns on 35 attempts. Entering the week, I did put stock into the week 8 splits for Atlanta when they lost Ridley early. It kind of panned out. Hayden Hurst did lead the team with 8 targets. Julio Jones had 7. They led the team in targets on Thursday night of week 8. But Jones, just 54 yards and a touchdown for a good, not great day. Olamide Zaccheaus, Russell Gage each had 6 targets, but couldn't have been much different in the production columns. Gage had 11 yards. Zaccheaus had 103 and a touchdown, including a long touchdown. He had 3 downfield targets. Gage did have 2 to his credit, as did Hayden Hurst, but Zaccheaus played 73% of snaps. And honestly, despite his injury, kind of sounded like Calvin really wasn't that far off from playing somehow. The Falcons did say that he's going to be kind of back shortly, but they're going on bye next week, so it's very likely we do see Calvin really back for week 11. The market shares the past 2 games, just in case, though, 26% for Julio Jones, 23% for Hayden Hurst. Zaccheaus really was not – I don't even know if he played on Thursday night, but he has just 6 targets in that sample, and he had 6 targets this week. But 24.2 yard average target depth for Zaccheaus. So if Ridley's out, it's going to be Julio, then a big drop to Hurst and Zaccheaus for me. But if Ridley's back, I think I would put Julio over Calvin Ridley at this point. I don't think it's a huge gap. Hayden Hurst would still be in play, but I'm kind of leaning more toward Julio than Ridley, which is not where I was early in the year. And, I mean, the obligatory Todd Gurley stat line, 19 rushes, 53 yards, 2 targets. He did score, but you can't use him. His team played from ahead. They put up 34 points. He was barely a factor. So no ceiling for Todd Gurley.
It's wild that a dude who is second in the league in red zone market share has no ceiling, but it's very, very, very true.
Yeah, it's just where we are with Todd Gurley. I mean, it sucks because he used to be so fun. He used to be unfadable.
Yeah,
but he's very fadeable now. Drew Lock has been inefficient this year, and there's really no way to say it differently, even when you adjust for his opponents. This week, he did put up 313 passing yards, but posted 0.04 passing and expected points per dropback on a passing success rate of about 41%, which are both well below the NFL averages of 0.14 and 49% respectively. Poor efficiency, I should say, can be overcome with volume, and we did see a bit of that here. 48 attempts, did run 7 times for 47 yards and a touchdown, but didn't really run much before that. I don't want to bank on Drew Lock turning into a Konami quarterback. Maybe Jim has a different take, but
very athletic, but he's not going to run a whole lot. He'll be good when he does run, but I wouldn't expect him to be a Konami guy either.
Yeah, that's what we've seen for most of the year until this week. But there was enough volume here for a big game from Jerry Jeudy. He had 14 targets, 7 catches, 125 yards and a touchdown, 6 downfield targets, which did tie for the week lead with one game left to play. Wouldn't expect anyone from the Monday night game to kind of overtake that. But KJ Hamler had 10 targets for 75 yards. Tim Patrick had 9 for 29 yards. Did score, had 3 empty downfield targets. So the role for Tim Patrick was better than the numbers kind of implied. And despite Albert Okwuegbunam leaving early with a knee injury, Noah Fant was an afterthought with just 3 targets. This team's most relevant sample is kind of hard to figure out because they've had games without Drew Lock, without Fant, without Tim Patrick, without KJ Hamler. But there are 2 games with Lock, Patrick, Fant, and Hamler, week 7 and 9 there. But 21% target share for Jerry Jeudy there leads the team. That helps me because I think Jerry Jeudy is the most intriguing of all the skill position players here. Tim Patrick's at 15%, so is KJ Hamler, and the Noah Fant's at 11%. The downfield work favors Jerry Jeudy as well. 7 downfield targets in the span, 4 for Tim Patrick, 3 for Fant, 1 for Hamler. And with Drew Lock just slinging it deep all the time, that inspires confidence for Jeudy, especially when we're looking at what should be a value receiver. If you're not going to have a ton of targets, you at least want them to be downfield for big play potential. I would consider Tim Patrick in the right spots. Fant's still definitely viable. He has a good overall workload for a tight end, but I won't really even talk about the backfield. Melvin Gordon, he played 60% of snaps, but had just 6 carries. Phillip Lindsay had more carries. It's just an irrelevant backfield. They play the Raiders next week. Total's 51. Spread's 4.5.
Are you willing to go with the Broncos in that spot, or are you scared that they needed that much garbage time to pay off in week 9?
That's the concern. But what helps me is that the only Broncos that would really want to play, like actively want to play, would be Noah Fant, just because tight end is so bad.
Yeah.
And then Jerry Jeudy, just because he should lead the team in targets and should get a lot of downfield work. So it's not like I'm, all in on this offense and need to go back. It's just kind of, mini stacks between, I would assume, Darren Waller, maybe Jerry Jeudy, something like that.
Just don't sleep on Derek Carr, man. He's slinging it, baby. Jeudy is 58 again next week, so I think that's kind of in the John Brown zone where it's very forgivable. It's something we can definitely go back to and just double down on what we had this past week. Betting on the NFL is great. Betting on the NFL risk-free is even better. FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to bet on Week 10 of the NFL risk-free with their exclusive same-game parlays. Simply place a 3-leg or more parlay on any NFL Week 10 game to be eligible for the offer and follow along as the game unfolds. If you don't win your bet, FanDuel will refund your bet up to $10 in site credit. What do you have to lose? Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, or Iowa. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit and expires in 7 days. Max refund is $10. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. And in Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Let's go to Carolina at Kansas City. And there was a report before the game that Christian McCaffrey would split work with Mike Davis. But not all reports are created equal. If it's from Adam Schefter, I trust it as gospel, or a trusted beat reporter. There are certain beat reporters I will always believe in. Adam Schefter is another guy I always believe in. Some reports are not super reliable. Kind of a subtweet. This turned out to be one of them. McCaffrey, he was himself. 18 carries, 10 targets, 74% snap rate. That's not splitting work, man. He did get his ribs banged up in the final drive, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But we should treat McCaffrey the way we did before his injury. And this is not hindsight. I told Brandon and JJ on Slack pregame, I'm not buying it because of who said this. So just keep that in mind. McCaffrey being back is great for running back and for us. It seems like it might be bad for DJ Moore. Moore had just 3 targets. Robbie Anderson had 12 with 4 deep shots. Curtis Samuel had 9 with 2 deep. If both Samuel and McCaffrey are going to be more involved, somebody's got to get the squeeze. Based on this game, Moore looks like he could be that guy. I would not project DJ Moore behind Curtis Samuel. I want to make that abundantly clear, but those targets got to come from somewhere. So I'm not out on DJ Moore, but I'm also not actively looking to get in on him while his stock is low. And I think that's an important distinction to make. We mentioned on the podcast that the Panthers defense keeps things in front of them a lot. And Patrick Mahomes' average depth of target was just 7.6. So that was kind of right, but they threw so much and so efficiently that it didn't matter one bit. So I'm just not sure there are any defenses that can stop the Chiefs when they just give the run game the middle finger the way they have the past 2 weeks. So, I was overthinking it a bit there. They also just pumped volume to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. Hill had 18 targets with 6 deep. Kelce had 12 total for the season. Kelce is up to a 24% target share. Hill is at 22%. Hill has 49% of the deep targets. So if you're looking strictly at ceiling, like 90th percentile outcome, Tyreek Hill is your preferred option. But if you want median outcomes or like a 75th percentile outcome, the positional replacement and those outcomes favor Travis Kelce. Mecole Hardman had a decent 5-target day, but he ran fewer routes than Demarcus Robinson by a smidge. He's a guy who can have a good game, but his usage seems game plan dependent rather than being something we can predict. And that's important to note. Like, you're not going to know if it's a quote-unquote Mecole Hardman game beforehand, and you're probably not going to be able to predict it based on personnel, which is annoying. The Chiefs have just decided not to run, something that it makes the backfield pretty irrelevant. It seems like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still leading, but he had 5 carries and 5 targets. So hard pass on both Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell. Now that they are not running and splitting work. Brandon, I want to go back to you on the Panthers pass catchers. Do you agree with me where we're no longer in a spot where you want to buy DJ Moore stock while it's low?
Unfortunately, they've been hesitant to give him a lot of work. Don't quote me on this, but I feel like Robbie Anderson's led in targets like just about every week between the two. And now Curtis Samuel is, I said on the recap show last week that I wasn't putting too much stock into what Curtis Samuel did on that Island game on Thursday, but, he has an 18% target share now over the past 2 games. DJ Moore's at 12%. Moore does have a higher ADOT by about 3.5 yards, but I mean, there's just not enough volume for DJ Moore. They won't throw him the ball. I don't know what's going on. So I would just trust Robbie Anderson number 1 among the 3 pass catchers. I'm not going to play Curtis Samuel. I'm not going to play DJ Moore. I think Moore is fine if you're still have him in like a season-long league, but I think Anderson's just so far ahead of the other 2 that it's kind of not a debate.
Yeah. Robbie Anderson's had more targets in 6 of 9 games. Nice. They have Tampa Bay next week, so tough matchup for sure. But Christian McCaffrey, like, it doesn't matter the matchup. You just use it.
Can I ask you one thing? Because you said about Travis Kelce. I've kind of reversed my tune on like Kelce and as like the only stud tight end. You mentioned positional replacement. Are you treating him differently?
I treat him as a wide receiver.
So, like, going back to, like, the, just say, $8,000 tight end, $55,000, $6,000 receiver, or you flip-flop those with, like, any receiver in that range, and then you're
like, would I rather have John Brown and Travis Kelce or a bad tight end in, like, Julio, let's say?
Something like that. Like,
depends on the matchups, obviously, but probably Kelce. Right. That's where I've been coming from with Kelce lately. Other tight ends can obviously have ceilings, but it's so hard to predict who's going to. I think the one exception is Kittle.
Yes, but he's hurt. But it's so hard to predict who those tight ends are going to be. And I know Travis Kelce doesn't always come through. He did, and especially the times that I've touted him a lot. But it's not like receivers come through every single week either.
Right. I feel better about a $5,000 receiver generating a ceiling than I do about a $5,000 tight end. Which is
where I've been coming from lately with Kelce. I know they're not.
The reason we like went back and forth on that one was the specific slate because I thought that there were some decent tight ends and I was worried about the Broncos keeping pace. We don't need to relitigate that, but I think that overall that point is correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
No, I agree. Yeah, you're right. I agree. Overall, that's the correct thought process, and I think you're correct. And it's just hard to say no to Travis Kelce. Let's move now to Chicago and Tennessee. I forgot this game was happening because nothing important happened in it outside of A.J. Brown continuing to be really good. And maybe we'll get Cordero Patterson running the football a bit or Ryan Nall.
I don't know. Yeah. This is another game where the final score looked close, but it wasn't that way throughout it. It finished 24-17, but the Titans were up 17-0 entering the fourth quarter. I mean, neither of these teams are particularly fun for daily fantasy. They're both in prime time next week, though, so we get to figure out these teams for single game slates. But
protest.
The game script here led to 24 dropbacks on 55 total plays for the Titans. Ryan Tannehill had 10 completions for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. Only 5 Titans had a target. Only 3 had more than 3. That was A.J. Brown with 9. Anthony Ferkser with 6 and Corey Davis with 3. He didn't catch any of them. I mean, Davis had been trending up, but just when the other team can't keep pace, this can happen, especially for a team like the Titans. They're not the Chiefs, who will throw it no matter what the score is, apparently, at this point. So, these games can happen for teams like the Titans. They're not a pass-first offense. But A.J. Brown's just kind of a monster. He's always tempting for daily fantasy. The thing with him, though, is his volume's been way more predictable this year than it was last year. He's had at least 7 targets in every game so far, and he has scored in 5 straight games, but the ADOT's a little down, but the volume's better, so it's kind of a trade-off with A.J. Brown. And honestly, Brown is someone who, once he gets the ball in his hands, can do something with it. So I'm a little bit less concerned about the depth of his targets at this point. But in 4 games with A.J. Brown and Corey Davis both healthy, Brown leads with 26% of the targets. Davis is still at 25%. Davis actually leads in downfield work, 5-4. Also an average depth of target, 11.3 yards downfield for Davis, 9 for A.J. Brown. But again, Brown's not being used the way that he was last year. I'm okay with it because there's a higher floor and there's still a ceiling with A.J. Brown because of what he can do. And nobody else in this sample is above Johnny Smith's 12% target share, which isn't even high for a tight end. So it's just kind of A.J. Brown for me. Maybe Corey Davis if the matchup's right. And I mean, Derrick Henry, I don't think anybody was really predicting a huge game from Derrick Henry here. He had a bad overall matchup, but he gave you exactly what he's capable of giving you at times, just the rushing yardage, nothing else. He had 21 carries, not a single target. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's just that's something Derrick Henry can do, is get you nothing but his rushing yardage, which is the worst way to accumulate fantasy points for a running back, basically, is just yardage and not touchdowns, not catches, not receiving yards. So, I mean, it is what it is with Derrick Henry. He's not matchup proof. They host the Colts on Thursday Night Football. For what that's worth, I'm gonna have to feel like I got to play Derrick Henry on that slate, but I don't want to.
Derrick Henry in a Thursday night game? Oh, you forget the narratives. He's had 2 99-yard touchdowns, baby. This is like bigger than Derrick Henry in November. Is Derrick Henry on Thursday Night Football? He's not playing the Jags, unfortunately, but pretend he is.
I mean, if this was Thursday night post Thanksgiving,
yeah, I think gotta get the turkey in people. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
I think every all-time rushing record will be broken whenever Derrick Henry plays the primetime game on Thanksgiving.
Oh man.
Like 600 yards, 13 touchdowns. I think that's kind of a lot.
12 attempts. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk to I'll talk to Raj and see if we can get that for next year.
Yeah. For the Bears here, David Montgomery got evaluated for a concussion. Not totally sure what's going to happen there. And I mean, it's not like he left early. He had enough work to do something, but he didn't, which is kind of typical for him. 14 carries, 3 targets for 42 yards and no touchdowns. He has just no ceiling in this offense. He's maxed out at 20.2 FanDuel points, which he did once. Other than that, his max is 15.4. So I don't know who's going to take over. Hopefully it's Cordero Patterson just for the fun angle, but
also a revenge game next week if it is.
The big issue is that this isn't a spot where volume's finally opening up. Like the sea is parting for someone to get a lot of volume. It's just been this offense overall. Montgomery hasn't been able to do much with it. Not saying, and that's despite David Montgomery having, I think, the vision of Le'Veon Bell, the legs of
someone said
Barkley.
The ball security of Zeke Elliott. I think it was Kegs and Eggs on Twitter. Or maybe it was someone else, but like
Yeah.
it was amazing.
So even if they name Cordero Patterson as their RB1, I think I won't be overly interested just because of this offense. Speaking of which, Nick Foles just not very good. This is one of those spots where volume led to some sort of upside with 335 yards on 52 attempts and 2 touchdowns, but really, really bad from an expected point standpoint. He's now been comfortably worse than Mitchell Trubisky on the full season. Not that either have been good, but I don't know how long Foles will start.
Well, Trubisky's hurt too.
Oh, he's hurt?
Yeah, they had that one play last week where he came in to run like a quarterback read and he hurt his shoulder.
Oh, I didn't.
And I feel bad because like I tweeted the hashtag free Trubisky, and I feel like I contributed to his injury, and I feel bad because I feel bad for Mitch. People piled on too much. So
okay,
we're on the same page here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
although I will say finding injury information for a Monday morning is not as easy as you would think. For the NFL.
Not enjoyable. Well, no, this happened last week, but like,
I know, but
it wasn't reported because it doesn't matter because he's a backup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Justin Jackson got hurt. Like
he's not a backup though. How dare you?
No, but
yeah. Like the NFL.com has an injury page that shows injuries, and like Justin Jackson wasn't even on there, even though he got hurt the first play.
It can be really tough to like nail all the injuries.
Yeah.
And
we're not annoyed. Don't worry.
No.
No.
The good news, if there is good news, is that Nick Foles featured Allen Robinson, who had 9 targets, 81 yards. Darnell Mooney led with 11 targets, which is 43 yards. Anthony Miller had an extended role last week that Jim talked about. It was there again. He had 8 targets, but ran 42 pass routes, which is nice. Jimmy Graham had 6 targets. So if we look at the past 2 weeks with Anthony Miller doing extra things, he actually leads the team with 20% of the targets, but a 6.7 yard average depth of target. Mooney is at an 18% target share and almost a 13-yard ADOT with 6 total downfield targets. And then Allen Robinson's actually third with 17% of the targets. Not that I think that'll stick long term, but 10.4-yard average target depth, which is pretty average for a receiver. 6 downfield targets. So, I mean, it's still Robinson, then a big gap. The volume for Miller is slightly better, but with Mooney's downfield work, he's almost doubling up Anthony Miller in air yards per game. I know some people make fun of air yards, but that's silly. If you look only at receiving yards, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're just looking at descriptive stats. But for like a Monday night game, I would kind of lean Mooney over Miller despite the volume. I'm
just skeptical of Nick Foles' ability to convert on those air yards because I've like seen a lot of those deep targets, and they're like, I know we have data on this, and this is me talking anecdotally when we have data, which is very stupid, but like they're not catchable. Like, I know we have a similar discussion with Marquis Brown coming up, but like they're not catchable.
Yeah,
and like this is film bias. Where I have had Darnell Mooney on single game slates and Foles overthrows him by 30 yards. So it is that. And I want to qualify that.
That's part of it. Just because you get targeted downfield doesn't mean it was catchable. But, on a single game slate, if you catch one of those, that's better than Anthony Miller getting 50 air yards on 6 targets.
Yeah, but he actually converts on them,
For what, though? Is Anthony Miller going to break?
He had like 100 yards last week, didn't he?
I don't know, but I'm saying like if he's getting these moderate targets down the field versus similar overall volume for a lot of deep shots, I understand it's Nick Foles.
In most situations, yes. Most situations. However,
okay, so
the Bears are not most situations.
We're on the same page. The issue isn't the approach; it's Nick Foles.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But you're 100. Like that's what I'm saying. In most situations, I 100% agree with you.
Okay.
Just not with Nick Foles. Speaking of bad deep balls, let's move to Baltimore and Indy, and we don't have to talk about Lamar Jackson's deep balls because they didn't let him throw deep. This was their first full game without Ronnie Stanley, and it seemed like the Ravens were trying to get the ball out quickly. Lamar Jackson just 86 air yards on 23 attempts. That could be because the Colts' defensive front is really strong. And it was a bad matchup for this Ravens team with no Ronnie Stanley, but it is worth monitoring as it would really sap any upside from Marquis Brown and Mark Andrews. Not that Mark Andrews had a ton of upside to begin with. Shut your mouth on Marquis Brown. They also didn't get any squeaky wheel narrative for Marquis Brown. He was tied for the team lead in targets, but it was just 5. One was deep. Mark Andrews had 5 as well, with 1 in the red zone. Des Bryant did not have a target, so put an X in that column. So the pecking order here is the same.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, but we should downgrade the passing offense if they're going to be more conservative with Stanley out. I don't think this was an entirely fluky thing. They're facing a bad defensive front, like if they face Cincinnati, hypothetically, then we can go at the passing game maybe, but you kind of need them to face a bad defensive line. I think that it's important to view them through that lens right now. J.K. Dobbins out-carried Gus Edwards again this week, but didn't lead to anything. 12 carries and 2 targets for Dobbins, 11 carries, 2 targets for Edwards. Dobbins did out-snap Edwards, and he does profile better for fantasy due to the better potential to catch passes, but the offense could struggle with Stanley out, so I don't think we need to go crazy here. Like, you prefer Dobbins, but it's kind of like Zach Moss, where you prefer him, but like, does it matter? I don't know. The Bills' offense is better right now too. So
yeah, not on like these are the kind of guys where on a full slate they might be like interesting themselves, but on a full slate you have too many other options.
Yeah, they face New England next week, so they're not on the main slate, which is probably for the best. I need more data on this.
Another primetime game for the Patriots, 2 in a row.
I know. What a year. What a great year for primetime games. We saw last week that Jordan Wilkins was potentially pulling away from Jonathan Taylor, but they went full Patriots here. Nobody played more than 34% of the snaps. Nobody had more than 11 carries. Nobody had more than 3 targets. The Colts have become a parody of themselves from a workload perspective. Same thing at receiver. Even with T.Y. Hilton out, nobody had more than 7 targets, despite 40 targeted throws. How does that happen? Michael Pittman did have 7 with 3 deep. I'm willing to keep an eye on that because he's fun, but my goodness, this team sucks for fantasy. Like, for a decent team, you said they were the worst team in DFS, and I think when you make it relative to offensive efficiency, you're right.
Yeah, we know the Jets are bad. We know the Patriots are not a good DFS offense, but you would think this team would be in a good spot. Do you think maybe it has anything to do with Phillip Rivers? A lot of kids is used to sharing stuff, so nobody do you think it has anything to do with it?
He needs to get at least to throw the ball to at least 9 different people to keep everyone happy, feed all the mouths. But yeah, I think the Rivers kid narrative is viable. So if he's still playing once his kids start to go to college, maybe we buy back in on Phillip Rivers' offenses. But until then, we got to hold off.
Yeah, I mean, all jokes aside, you can't really touch this offense on a full slate.
I don't know where you go for the single game slate on Thursday.
That's the thing. It's what do you do?
I don't know. Jordan Wilkins is the preferred back right now for me, but it doesn't matter. He's probably going to get salaried up. So
what you really do is what is it? Tennessee in Indy?
Yeah.
Probably a 4-1 stack.
Most likely. I guess Jack Doyle did get hurt, so maybe we can go Mo Alley Cox or Trey Burton. And it stinks because Jack Doyle's fun. But it was also a really dirty hit. Maybe you go to tight end as your 1 because they'll probably be pretty low salary, but yeah, it's brutal. Let's talk about happier things. Talk about Dalvin Cook with Detroit at Minnesota. Dalvin Cook, is he in the Christian McCaffrey tier right now?
Are you saying current Christian McCaffrey or just
I think he is, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Cool.
Cool. So the thing is, if you look at Dalvin Cook and you really dig in, you can kind of see some red flags in the sense that his actual adjusted opportunities per game are never that high, but it's not because he gets game scripted out. It's whenever he's not getting a lot of work, it's because he's done the damage because his offense flows through him. He had 206 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 46 yards and 2 targets. And you can nitpick the targets, but if they were trailing, it's not like Dalvin Cook doesn't play or can't get targets. The thing is, the offense flows through him, and he's averaged 21 carries and 3 targets in his healthy games. He's tied for 6th in adjusted opportunities per game among running backs. But again, it's different from Derrick Henry, where there's not a lot of targets all the time, where he does the majority of his damage with rushing, because Derrick Henry has to do what Dalvin Cook does rushing to kind of be on this level. but Dalvin Cook can catch the ball, and if Dalvin Cook's team is trailing, he will still be involved. Derrick Henry will not. So that is the difference between the two. So I always get a little bit nervous with Dalvin Cook because he doesn't do a lot with receiving necessarily, and he breaks off these long runs. But like, it's a plus to be able to break off runs. But if that's all you do and that's your only path to upside, that is a very big limitation. So that's the difference for me. Hopefully for a lot of people as well. Minnesota ran 55 total plays. Kirk Cousins threw 20 times, completing 13 for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns. So there was efficiency, but even if you stacked this passing offense, you probably didn't benefit because the touchdowns went to Irv Smith Jr. He had 2, and Amir Abdullah in a revenge game had a 22-yard touchdown. Adam Thielen had just 5 targets for 38 yards. Justin Jefferson, 4 targets for 64. You can't always look at volume per game. I think it's relevant for some teams, but I think it's relevant for this team because it's fairly safe to say that if they have their choice, they're going to do exactly what they did the past 2 weeks, and that's give Dalvin Cook 52 carries and let Kirk Cousins throw 34 times. That's what this team would prefer to do. And if you look at this team in 4 games with Dalvin Cook getting a majority of the snaps since Justin Jefferson's emergence, Thielen leads with 29% of targets, which is awesome, but it's 6 targets per game. He does have 2.5 downfield targets per game. Jefferson himself's at 27%, which is a great market share, but that's 5.5 targets per game, 2 downfield targets per game, though, and that's it. It's so obvious who you can play among the pass catchers. They get elite market shares. They get pretty elite downfield work despite low volume, but there's no floor, and their ceilings are still kind of going to be somewhat limited because they don't want to throw the ball. You basically have to enter the perfect game script for those two to have exactly the pinnacle 90th percentile outcome. So that's just kind of where I am with them. There's no the floor is too low for me.
I think that prevents them from ever being like staple core options because you think about the odds, they either get way ahead or the offense totally collapses and they do nothing. Like those are 2 different paths to failure for those 2 guys, which stinks because like you said, like the ceilings are still there. But like the odds to total, like their range of outcomes is disgusting. And the odds they hit the low end are kind of like just too high. Like, of course you can still use them in tournaments, but like you can't make them like I had 40 percentile Locket this week. I can't do that ever with Jefferson or Thielen.
No. When the team wants to throw the ball 20 times a game, and they probably don't even want to throw it then. And then you're like, when they get in the red zone, they just want to hand it to Dalvin Cook. So like, it's a problem. I love the market shares, but you can't just apply market shares and say that they're great because the passing volume really leads to limited opportunities for them. I'm going to move into the Lions, which we love Matthew Stafford. He was on the COVID list. He was expected to play. He did play, but got a knee to the head, went into concussion protocol, apparently cleared it already. But this team's kind of rough right now. They had to play this one without Kenny Golladay. And Matthew Stafford usually struggles without Golladay, which is what happened here. Chase Daniel came in, 94 yards and 13 attempts, was about league average in terms of net expected points per drop back, just in case Matthew Stafford can't play. But, the overall targets here, 10 for Danny Amendola, 8 for TJ Hawkinson, 5 for Marvin Hall, DeAndre Swift, and Adrian Peterson. Golladay didn't practice at all this week, so he might not be ready for next week. And in games without Golladay or with him limited, nobody has better than a 17.3% target share, which actually belongs to Danny Amendola. Hawkinson's at 17% of the targets. Marvin Jones is at 15%. So, there's just not a whole lot of downfield work. There's just not much here. I really just hope Kenny Golladay, I know it's weeks off, but if he's not on the Thanksgiving slate, I'm going to be very, very sad.
Oh, man.
And then
I'm very ready for that slate, by the way. Like, that 3-game slate is just, like, so fun every year. I can't wait.
It doesn't look that fun this year, but hopefully.
I don't care how good it is.
That's true. That's true. Adrian Peterson will have another revenge spot next week against Washington, but just 43 yards and 8 carries. Did have 5 targets, as I mentioned. With the snaps here, just they're bad. 40% for DeAndre Swift after about 66%, I think, last week. A negative game script. Kerryon Johnson played 33%, 27% for Adrian Peterson. So, no.
I might have. Okay, so I tweeted out a joke Adrian Peterson revenge game line, and I want to see I'm pretty sure I said he'd have 43 yards. I don't know. This is stupid. I just want to be happy about being right about a joke. But anyway, like Marv. No,
which
right? Marv? Bad Marv.
Which is Marvin Jones, to clarify.
Correct.
I didn't even mention his targets because he had 4, so he didn't really crack like the top tier of them.
Just no, right?
Yeah, I think he's a firm no at this point.
Dust. We're not using Amendola either because I have respect for myself. Hawkinson, fine, but he tends to be oversalaried. So,
yeah, that's true. You don't want Danny Amendola's 4.6 yard average target depth.
I don't want Danny Amendola's anything.
I mean, it's higher on the full season, so I don't want to.
I don't care. I don't want it. I don't care. He's my nemesis, and I refuse to consider him. Let's move to the Giants at Washington. Alex Smith got a second crack at quarterback with Kyle Allen getting banged up and did play much better this time. He finished with 0.09 expected points per dropback. That is below average and against a poor defense, but it's Alex Smith, so we can be happy about it. It's worth noting his ADOT was 3.3, which is outrageous. For fantasy, it would be better if Kyle Allen plays, but it sounds like he dislocated his ankle, which sounds not ideal. So it's nice to see Alex Smith playing better. It would be a downgrade for this offense, though, because I would assume Allen can't go. I don't know what a dislocated ankle is. It just doesn't sound good. But it is a downgrade for this offense, even though Alex Smith looked okay. He did give volume to Terry McLaurin, though, which is kind of all we can hope for here. McLaurin had 8 targets, and he took his lone deep target for a long tutty. So McLaurin's talent makes him viable, even if Smith does start. We should prefer it to be Allen, but, whatever. I'm still not chasing Logan Thomas here. He's fine, but I don't think he'll ever burn me for not using him. So whatever. Antonio Gibson, 67% of the team's running back carries. That's good. But it was 6 total carries, whereas J.D. McKissic had 3 carries. McKissic, 14 targets compared to Gibson's 3. Gibson has shown the ability to have decent games, but this is a bad team. He's splitting work still, so I am okay missing out. Daniel Jones struggled again, took 5 sacks, and had just 212 passing yards on 39 dropbacks. So this offense is pretty brutal. At least they're getting good volume to their pass catchers. Evan Engram led with 10 targets. Sterling Shepard had 8. In 3 games with Shepard back, he has 25% of the targets, and Engram is at 28%. Darius Slayton has slid down to 14%, which stinks because I do like Slayton. Both Shep and Engram have 1.7 deep targets per game, so I'm willing to consider Shep and Engram in the right spots. We just have to know that the inefficiency is going to be maddening. I was off Engram before, but now he's getting deep work again, so I can be more open to him than I was before. I would still rank Slayton above Austin Mack, who got 5 targets with Golden Tate being out, but Slayton's probably not on the DFS radar for the time being. I'm not sure if it's the injury or just having more mouths to feed. But regardless, I can't get there. So Shep and Engram are fine in the right spots. Slayton off the radar for now. The same is true for the backfield where they're kind of off the DFS radar. I love Wayne Gallman. I adore him. He scored again. But he had just 14 carries while Alfred Morris had 9 and Dion Lewis got 3. Gallman had 2 targets. He is the top guy here until Devontae Freeman is back, but it does not matter on full slates. Brandon, are you okay going at Evan Engram here? Because I think that you've been more open to him than I have been, and I'm warming up to him. Where do you sit on him now, given that he's getting deep work again?
So I don't know where this stands now, but I actually sent to you and JJ Zacharyson on Slack.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true. If you don't know JJ, but you know me.
To Jimmy Johnson.
Daniel Jones has been efficient down the field this year, which is one of the wildest things because of how inefficient he's been overall. But I've been in on Evan Engram to a degree because the volume's there, and he just hasn't scored. I pegged him as a touchdown regression. I actually tweeted something this past week. Engram was bound to have some positive touchdown regression. He scored here. So I'm definitely okay with Evan Engram in DFS because he is a tight end, and tight ends have so many issues, but Engram clearly has a path to upside from being so athletic and hopefully getting some downfield work now.
They get Philly next week, which is a rematch of the Daniel Jones stumble game, and I am excited for that. Let's move to another exciting game between Houston and Jacksonville. Looked good initially, at least, and then kind of cooled off after that. What'd you see overall here?
Yeah, it started off like a rocket with big touchdowns for DJ Chark, Brandon Cooks, but then just 16 total second half points. It was a 27-25 win. The rare 25, I think. That's like a 33-25, I think, are like the numbers that kind of build pools around. If I had friends and was in pools, I would know better, but I don't actually. I feel like that's
People
correct.
Do that for outside of the Super Bowl or no?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I never do them for the Super Bowl either because I just would rather do things that I can actually control. Yeah. I guess you can control if you pick the squares, but whatever.
David Johnson left with a concussion, as did guard Senio Calamete. Is he good? He seemed good from the Pro Football Focus data I looked at, but it's not good to lose any offensive lineman ever. It's not a plus, so I can tell you that much.
He's not a difference maker, is what I'd say. Like when Wyatt Teller got hurt for Cleveland, that was a difference maker. I wouldn't put him in that same discussion.
Okay. Yes, depends on who's replacing him, though. But, despite the win, the Texans had another peculiar game, which I guess seems like the norm for them, but I guess by definition, if it's not peculiar, if it's the norm. But it's our podcast, so
yeah, we can redefine words. Why not?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I was being ironic. Deshaun Watson threw 32 times for 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns went to Will Fuller on a 77-yarder and Brandon Cooks on a 57-yarder. Watson ran 10 times for 50 yards to lead the team. It's really easy to love Deshaun. What I guess I find peculiar here is that Fuller caught every target, but it was just 5. He had 100 yards and a score. Brandon Cooks had 9 targets, caught just 3 for 83 yards, but everything else is spread out behind them, and it just feels like there should be more from this team with how efficient Watson's been. He's at 0.26 passing net expected points per dropback, and they started off with 3 really tough matchups, but since week 4, he's at 0.36 passing net expected points per dropback, which is more than double the league average of 0.14. So he's been really efficient, but we have 2 clear top pass catchers with Brandon Cooks getting 24% of targets in that sample. Fuller's at 21%, but they don't always come through. Those target shares aren't like 28 and 26% or anything like that. And the touchdowns still feel like they can kind of go anywhere. It's just probably a bias I have with the Texans, but I kind of expect more from them, and I don't always get it. Not that I'm saying what they did this week was bad, but I just kind of, for how efficient Watson's been, I kind of expect a little bit more. With David Johnson leaving early after just 7 snaps, Duke Johnson took over, had 16 carries, 4 targets while playing 81% of the snaps. But, this is kind of similar to the David Montgomery thing where the issue wasn't opportunity. It was just efficiency and doing stuff with the workload that was there. And based on our net expected points data, Duke Johnson's been less efficient than David Johnson on the year. So
and David's been one of the worst running backs in football.
Yeah. So again, it's not like Duke Johnson's going to get all this work. It's like David Johnson had a lot of work, didn't do much with it. So
it was kind of like the discussion we had around the Dolphins with Myles Gaskin, where Gaskin was fine for fantasy, but wasn't crushing. So we shouldn't really expect anyone else to crush either in that role.
Yeah. I would say that's true. So I'm really primarily interested in Watson, Fuller, and Cooks. And it might sound like I'm down on them. I'm not. But I don't want to put them in the Seattle tier of Russ, Metcalf, and Locket. But I want that gap to be a little closer. I feel like it should be, but it never is. So I'm probably just.
I'm gonna talk to you about Fuller after you do the Jag side. Okay. After you talk about our boy Jake Luton.
Yeah. So Gardner Minshew's job might be in jeopardy. Jake Luton definitely showed something week 9, despite not being perfect. 0.21 passing net expected points per dropback, comfortably above the NFL average. 304 yards and a touchdown with an interception as well. Had 9 downfield attempts, which was tied for 3rd most on the week so far. Completed 4 of those for 137 yards and a touchdown. Just one run. Showed some athleticism with that spin move, straight out of Madden, to score at the goal line. But, that's interesting. And,
quarterback upgrade.
Laviska Shenault departed early with a hamstring injury. He played just 10 snaps. DJ Chark was trending toward a big day before that with that long touchdown early. He wound up with 12 targets, 146 yards, and a touchdown. But we actually saw a little bit of a resurgence for my boy Chris Conley. 8 targets for 52 yards. Only one of those was downfield. I'm more inclined to play Chris Conley than anybody. I can tell you that much, but I'm not quite there yet. I want the downfield work to go more toward him. It wasn't really there. That's kind of what he does best. Tyler Eifert had 5 targets, but, I think the real story here is DJ Chark. He had 5 of the 9 downfield attempts. He's really easy to like overall, but I think he could be trending up with more downfield attempts, which is something I actually alluded to on the Thursday podcast. Gardner Minshew's actually efficient when he throws downfield, but he doesn't do it a lot. Luton threw deep more this week, so the arrow on DJ Chark is up for me. And the arrow remains up on James Robinson, honestly. 25 carries, 99 yards, and a touchdown. Just 2 empty targets, which is a low since week 1. He had at least 4 targets in every game since week 2 entering this one. Chris Thompson did have 4 targets, which is a little frustrating, but Robinson still played 72% of the snaps. Thompson played just 28%. If Thompson's going to take away some of those targets, I can't go too hard at Robinson, who was actually kind of a core play for me this week. At the salary, he just made a lot of things work. But, if Robinson's still around that 7,000 range, I'll be fine with it. That's the big question, is where the salary goes from here. But, they play Green Bay next week, so there should be a lot of downfield attempts, maybe some more dump-offs. So not the worst offense right here for the expected salaries.
And I think that the mesh between Luton and Chark is better than the mesh between Minshew and Chark, so I agree. I kind of hope they just let it ride. Let's go back to the Texans receivers. Outside of week 2, when Fuller got hurt, can you name me his lowest FanDuel point total this year?
Probably something like 12-ish. It feels like really, really good.
It's 11. And he's had fewer than 13 points just once outside of that one game.
How many ceiling games has he had?
That's the issue, is that he hasn't had like the 2019 Will Fuller against the Atlanta game. His max is 21.3. He's at 18.5, 19.8. So he's been like there. And I think that that's why I am still in on Fuller. I think that because of his yardage, he can pay off without a touchdown. And I think because of his talent, he has the ability to have a 2-touchdown game.
Right.
So although he hasn't shown like a 30-point ceiling yet, I think the building blocks for it are there. Yes. And that's why I still feel really, really good about him.
Yes. That's
I get what you're saying, though. Yeah. I get what you're saying.
Like, I want the Will Fuller being Will Fuller game. He's had like the high floor. He has scored in 6 straight games, no multi-touchdown games. So it's like, I'm not down on Will Fuller. I'm just disappointed that we haven't seen any of those eruption games from him, because it's capable of it.
Yeah,
we just haven't seen it, and like that's what's frustrating, because Watson. It's not even like Deshaun Watson's just not efficient this year without DeAndre Hopkins. That's not it. He's very good. So
they get Cleveland next week, so I'll be using Will Fuller again. And I agree, Cooks is very much in play too. I think
Fuller's still 71 as well.
Yeah, what's
Cooks is 63.
Okay, that's fine. I think that gap's appropriate, right? Like around $800 or so is about right.
Yeah, it's probably
maybe
about
a bit
right.
less. Yeah,
it should maybe. Yeah, I think it's about fair though.
Okay, yeah, that'll be a fun game though. I'm looking forward to that one. We'll certainly talk about that one on Thursday. Let's move now to the Raiders at the Chargers. In this game, again, kind of like Bills, Seahawks lived up to our high expectations, which is fun. It just didn't really translate to a ton of volume for the Raiders. They had 24 dropbacks and 26 rush plays. That's what happens when you run a bunch. It can sap volume. So they played well, but we really should keep in mind they're still pretty rush heavy, and that's the one downside of this team that I do like. It's just they're a little run heavy. Unfortunately, not all that running went to Josh Jacobs. He had 14 carries and 1 target. Devontae Booker had 8 carries. Jacobs was on the injury report with a knee injury and an illness. He just hasn't really seemed healthy outside of last week where he got 31 carries. So I think the way to handle Jacobs is based on the injury report. Upgrade him if he's healthy. Be skeptical if he continues to find himself on the injury report, whether full practice or not. Keep an eye on it. The Raiders didn't throw much, but when they did, Derek Carr was actually chucking it again. He's been doing this for a bit now. His ADOT was a hair over 12 yards. Since Henry Ruggs' return, Carr's average depth of target is 8.8. It was 6.7 the first 4 weeks. So that makes Carr at least an option for DFS, and it makes his defense or this offense on the whole a delight. You just have to make sure they're in a spot where they will have to throw, which they weren't on Sunday. Or they didn't on Sunday. They were in a spot where I thought they could throw. They didn't. So Carr trending up, this offense trending up. We just need them to throw. Even with the lack of throwing, Darren Waller still had 10 targets. He didn't do a whole lot with it because he had just 22 yards, and that can be frustrating. Waller has topped 14 FanDuel points just once the entire season. But that's kind of some bad luck, kind of like we were talking about with Fuller. Like, he has the building blocks here, just hasn't quite put them all together in the same game yet. He has a lot of deep targets, so he can't get yardage. He's topped 80 yards twice, and he can get touchdowns. Those two just haven't happened simultaneously all that often. So I wouldn't get too worried about the box score, the actual FanDuel points for Waller. He has both a floor and upside thanks to his combo of overall targets and touchdown upside. So that's hard to find a tight end.
He's especially next week.
Is he the highest salary guy?
He is, but he deserves it. He's 7,000. Then we have TJ Hawkinson at 62.
Rob
Gronkowski at 61. Zach Ertz and George Kittle. What's that?
Gronk's on the main slate for once?
Yeah.
How is Zach Ertz not minimum salary? I know he's not going to play because he's on IR, but how is he not minimum salary?
But we have Zach Ertz and George Kittle on IR at 6,000. Jerry Cook 6,000. Dallas Goedert is going to be.
I might rather roster Zach Ertz on IR than Zach Ertz healthy at this point.
I guess it's okay. So it drops off and is a little bit better with Fant, Evan Engram, Hunter Henry, but it looked pretty bad. It looked pretty bleak at the top. So
it is bleak. 7,000 is a little high, but I think I can still use him there because he's very good. Like we were saying, I think that the building blocks for a really big game are there, and that's what you need for a guy to 7,000. Everyone else is a pretty tough sell. In the 4 games with Ruggs back, Waller is the only guy with more than 13% of the targets. He's at 30%. Bryan Edwards came back but was not targeted. He could add an extra mouth into the fold, so it's just Waller and Jacobs for me here. Nobody else really gets enough volume. I know Aguilar has been good, but he doesn't get enough volume. Justin Herbert played well again with 0.37 passing net expected points per dropback, and they also, again, let him chuck it a bit. So I think this offense is great for DFS right now. I don't have many reservations at all. And a big part of that is we know where the ball is going. Keenan Allen, 11 overall targets again. Mike Williams and Hunter Henry both had 7. Williams had 3 deep targets. So we got a 3-game sample now since the bye with Williams, Allen, and Henry all healthy. And in that time, Keenan has 28% of the overall targets. Mike Williams has 15%, but 33% of the deep targets, 22% in the red zone. Hunter Henry, 15% overall. So I think that Keenan is still an elite option. I will bump him down a hair with Mike Williams getting a lot of high leverage targets.
So we're thinking 94 for Keenan now instead of 95?
Correct. Spot on. Keenan still has 100-plus yards, though, in 2 of those 3 games. So I'm not going overboard. I'm downgrading him from my outrageously high numbers previously. I still think that he's an $8,500 receiver, though. Name that salary for Keenan Allen.
I didn't listen to anything you said, so I didn't get sold on it. But just knowing what he typically does.
No. Oh yeah, what he typically does. Yes, base it on that.
78.
Okay, fair enough. Good enough. Henry and Williams are still just kind of for game stacks, but I'm pretty happy to stack this team right now. So although they're just game stacks, the odds that I stack them are pretty high.
He's 78, by the way.
Okay, that's fair. The running backs here were a mess because Justin Jackson got hurt right away. Then Kalen Ballage ran ahead of Joshua Kelly. If everyone is out again,
indication.
Yeah, including Tremaine Pope, I would prefer Ballage over Kelly. They just don't seem to trust Kelly right now. It's a rough backfield. I don't know what to do, man. Just avoid them. I think that's the easy way to view this team as of right now. Any other takeaways for you from this game, or can we move on to Miami at Arizona?
Let's move on.
Alrighty, this one was fun. I'm gonna let you talk about it. I'm gonna soak it all in because, it's fun to watch fun players play football, and that's what we had in this game.
Yeah, with Kyler and Tua, and some other guys too. Christian Kirk, I find very fun. DeAndre Hopkins, a little bit of a. Well, I'll talk about him, but I mean, the Dolphins won, and that's
so.
They're 2-0 with Tua.
Preseason, on covering the spread, I talked about betting both the Patriots and the Bills to miss the playoffs. The Bills one won't happen, and that's a bad bet. But I feel a lot better about the Patriots one because of how well the Dolphins are playing.
Yeah, 34-31. I mean, it could have gone into overtime, which would have been fun, but it didn't with the missed field goal. But Preston Williams left in the second quarter with a foot injury. It sounds like X-rays came back negative, so it's a sprain, but I don't know how long he'll be out. So keep that in mind for the Dolphins pass catchers. But Tua showed us much more than we got last week on his 22 attempts. Still just 28 attempts, but 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns going to Preston Williams and Mac Hollins. Tua ran 7 times for 35 yards as well. Through his 2 games now, Tua is at 0.08 passing net expected points per dropback, which is shy of the NFL average, but is at a 52% success rate, which is 3 points higher than the NFL average. So let's ride. The ADOT is 6.9 yards downfield, but in week 9 alone, it was 8.2, which is about league average. So don't overreact too much to what we saw last week. I think this week is a little bit more predictive of what Tua is going to give us. Still only 50 attempts from him over the 2 weeks, just 48 targeted attempts over the past 2 games. But in that span, Preston Williams does lead with a 21% target share, 13.2 yard ADOT. So if he's removed from that equation, we got to factor that in. But Devontae Parker's at 19% of the targets with an 8.3 yard ADOT. Parker obviously would be the bet to lead the team in target share here if Williams is out. Jakeem Grant is at 15% of targets. Mike Gesicki's at 13%, just 6 total targets for him, but is getting leverage on them at 13.5 yards downfield on average. So if Williams is out, it's Parker. Gesicki, I think the arrow's a little bit down on him, just based on what we've seen the past 2 weeks, but the volume should get a little bit better without Williams. I don't think I'm on Jakeem Grant with a low ADOT. And then in the backfield, no Myles Gaskin, which is very sad, but Jordan Howard led the backfield with 10 of 18 running back carries, just 19 yards. Did score, no targets. Salvon Ahmed, 7 carries, 38 yards, no targets. Patrick Laird, 1 carry, 1 target. And I mean, Gaskin got 6 targets from Tua last week. I think it's a personnel thing, not just how they use their team. So I'm mostly just interested in Parker, a little bit Gesicki. I don't know if I'm there to play Tua in DFS, but I don't think I have to. They host the Chargers next week, so we get Justin Herbert versus Tua. So that'll be fun. The Chase Edmonds experiment was not great. It was not bad. I'm not saying that, ironically. It wasn't great. In terms of the production, but he had 25 carries, 3 targets, 88 total yards, no touchdowns, but played 96% of the snaps, according to NFL.com. For the salary, that workload, which works out to 31 adjusted opportunities, if you told me he'd get that, play that many snaps at that salary, I would have went about it exactly the same way I did. Just didn't pan out, but we got to go with process over the results here, and nobody can argue that Chase Edmonds was a bad play because the workload itself was phenomenal. But a non-phenomenal workload did belong to DeAndre Hopkins here. He had just 3 targets, but 4 defensive pass interference penalties called against him, so that could have been 7 targets. But instead, it was Christian Kirk with the big game. 123 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets. Larry Fitzgerald had 5, so he was the only one who had more than 3 targets other than Kirk. But in games with Kirk healthy, Hopkins is at 27% of the targets, which is 9.3 per game. Kirk and Fitzgerald are each at 16%. But if you look at the past 3 games where Kirk's kind of elevated and separated a little bit, it's 24% of targets for Hopkins, 19% for Kirk, 17% for Fitzgerald. So, again, you kind of see that separation for Kirk. Hopkins, definitely I'm not forgetting about him, but the volume's a little bit of a concern. Just for knowing where he's going to be salaried relative to other wide receivers. But Kirk's the type of receiver who can win you tournaments with the downfield work. So, I mean, it's just hard not to like want to stack Kyler Murray a lot because he ran 11 times for 106 yards and touchdown. Generally, we're still talking about good market shares for Hopkins and Kirk. So I'm not saying like I'm down on Hopkins. I'm down on Hopkins a little bit, but up on Kirk. So I mean, overall, I think it's a very good offense, and I think at this point, based on what Kyler's doing and some of these other quarterbacks, I think the real change here for me is I think upside quarterbacks and the upside running backs, which are really the studs, which is what we saw from Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey. I think upside quarterbacks and running backs and then lower salaried receivers and tight ends is kind of the default way I think about FanDuel at this point. And they host the Bills next week, so.
So let's talk about Chase Edmonds because that was a bad output, but the workload is great. And next week, assuming that there's no Kenyon Drake, he gets the Bills. The Bills' rush defense is pretty bad. So name that star for Chase Edmonds based on what you saw in week 9, assuming, again, Kenyon Drake sits.
So this is tough because based on the workload, he should, like, the workload alone, he should be, like, 85. But
yeah,
based on the production, he's closer to, like, 7,000. So I'll probably kind of split the difference and say, like, 75, but I wouldn't be surprised if his salary is not that significantly changed based on the production.
I was thinking like 75 too. I think that's about the right number. And for next week, he is 71. So although the production was not there, if there's no Kenyon Drake, I say we just go back to the well, right?
I think you have to, or at least consider it. We're going to need to figure out how to handle McCaffrey, Kamara, and Aaron Jones at the top, but you don't really get.
It's a good problem to have.
You don't really get, but like, can you play all three? Do you play all three? It's gonna be tough. Historically, we've tried to do that stuff, but
we've gotten desperate to jam everything in. Yeah,
but I think the value backs now are getting less appealing throughout the year with these studs back.
Yeah, but like.
He's Chase Edmonds is different. So like
yes,
the cutoff kind of occurs around 7,000, and now when you're digging through like the Buccaneers backfield or like the Chargers backfield, it's like you can't really be bogging down your lineups with what ifs. And
so let's just keep John Brown and Christian Kirk low salaried, and we can be happy. That's all I ask for. Let's move to Pittsburgh and Dallas, where apparently our fears on James Conner were off because we were concerned about ceiling, but his floor apparently sucks too. He had just 9 carries and 2 targets. Anthony McFarland got a drive. Benny Snell got work. Why would you ever use James Conner right now? I don't care. If he gets a vote down in salary, no. Because the Steelers were trailing, we got to see a lot of passes, which gave us a lot of good data on the pass catchers, which is good. Chase Claypool led with 13 targets. Deontay Johnson had 10, and Juju Smith-Schuster had 7. We got 3 games now with all those guys healthy and playing, and in that time, Juju leads with 23% of the targets. Deontay's at 22%, Claypool 18%, Ebron 15%. We have Johnson and Claypool both with 27% of the deep targets. Juju's at 20%. The problem is that those numbers are low if you look at the raw numbers because Ben... Like Mina Kimes compared him to a pass first point guard. Pretty sure that's the most apt comparison I've seen for Big Ben this year. He's just not throwing downfield. Now he has a knee injury. Nobody's dominating the high leverage looks. Nobody on the team has multiple 20-point FanDuel games this year. I think they're a very annoying offense. I would rank Deontay 1, Claypool 2, Juju 3. Juju is higher for me than he was previously, but he was a cross-off. He's no longer a cross-off, but he's like not a target. I'm going to ask you about them in a second because they're a very weird offense. I'm not going to ask you about James Conner because he's irrelevant. Garrett Gilbert actually looked kind of okay when you adjust for the matchup and expectations. He finished with negative 4.88 passing net expected points, but it was at least encouraging to see them move the ball. It could mean they will be better after the bye with Andy Dalton back, but I'm not exactly leaping to target guys here. Just it's better than I expected. CeeDee Lamb had a decent day, finished with 71 yards on 7 targets. 5 of those were deep. We got 4 games now since Dak got hurt. And in that time, Amari leads with 7 overall targets per game. CeeDee has 6.8, but 2.3 deep targets per game. Gallup is at the same number of overall targets as Lamb, but fewer deep targets. Dalton Schultz is at 6 targets per game. Nobody has scored more than 17.4 FanDuel points in those games, and that was the only time that anyone had more than 15. So keep expectations in check across the board, but it might not be a bad idea to put CeeDee Lamb a little bit higher on our list. Like, I'm not going to use him, but I guess he's less out of consideration. I'd still rank Amari Cooper first, even with Lamb getting better shares, because Cooper's actually produced on the volume he's gotten. Zeke had a hamstring injury coming in, but his role was pretty much on par with what it had been previously. He had 18 carries and 3 targets in 4 games with no Dak, and since the fumble issues really got out of hand, Zeke is at 23.8 adjusted opportunities per game. That's not enough in a bad offense, so I will monitor them when Dalton is back, but the high salary for Zeke would have to be really low for me to get in. Brandon, what are your thoughts on the Steelers pass catchers? I say they're all really annoying. I have Deontay 1, Claypool 2, Juju 3. Do you have any different takes on this team?
No, I'd rank them that way as well. But as it is, like, you don't build your lineups around any of these guys. You don't build lineups thinking about, do I need Steelers? It's just, it's not there. Reading like those target shares, they're not the Colts. I'm not saying that they are. It's a little bit better, but the lack of like upside and the lack of predictable big games is not that much different. And I think Pittsburgh, because they're a popular team, probably always people are a little higher on them than they should be.
Well, especially next week because they get Cincinnati. Like, people are just going to go right back.
Yeah. So I think that it's easy to kind of talk yourself into it.
Yeah.
But I'm not there. Also, James Conner's 7,600 next week for what it's worth. So just wanted to throw that out there. But
what are we doing here?
I mean, it would depend on the salaries for the receivers.
I think if any of them winds up tracking to be chalk, you go underweight on them. You have to, I think.
I think you could easily justify full fade. I mean, Deontay's the lowest salary to 57 of them.
Okay, so like maybe that's different. I don't know.
57's a solid salary for Deontay.
The problem is if he winds up being popular as a result of that salary, I don't know if he can burn me if I fade him.
No, probably not.
So I don't know. I'm sure we'll talk more about them on Thursday. But like,
they feel like a bookmaker section team, not like a trend team at all. Those.
I don't want to spend a full trend on them. Let's move to New Orleans at Tampa Bay. Speaking of trends, Tampa Bay not going the right direction here. What did you see in this game before the poo hit the fan, which I guess would have been like a minute? I don't know.
Yeah, it was just a demolition of the Buccaneers here. There's no other way to put it. Drew Brees, another efficient quarterback performance, 4 touchdowns, 222 yards on 32 attempts. It's 0.24 passing expected points per drop back. Taysom Hill was involved, which I'm never high on Drew Brees because I don't trust that, we want our running backs to be on the field as much as possible. If your quarterback's not always on the field and doesn't run, like, the paths for him to destroy you is basically just 4 touchdowns, and that's it. Like, there's no other way. And outside of that, like, he's been hard to stack with anybody all season. But we did get Michael Thomas back. He tied for the team lead in targets with 6, which works out to 17.1%. Alvin Kamara also had 6 targets. Thomas's workload did include a red zone target and a downfield target. His ADOT of 7.8 yards was far lower than a receiver average. So we're going to need that volume to be back for Michael Thomas to be himself. Now, he did have 5 first-half targets, but it was still only 22%, not like that 30%, which is what we can kind of expect or typically expect from Michael Thomas. I'm not saying that 1/2 of his first game back is indicative of what we saw from Michael Thomas, but this wasn't like, oh, Michael Thomas is 100% back and I'm all in from the start. I'm not there. And look, like we know that the Saints didn't give anybody more than 17% of targets here, and that 17% is like my unofficial cutoff of where I start to get really nervous for receivers. So there's nobody else relevant here for me. And the biggest issue probably for me with the Saints is that they will give anybody a touchdown aside from the guys that you play, like Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. The touchdown scores were Emmanuel Sanders, Adam Troutman, Josh Hill, and Traquan Smith. I just feel like it's the Saints being the Saints, honestly.
It's the most predictable stuff in the world that Traquan scores this week and not the weeks where everyone is out.
Yeah, that's it. But like, I don't have any data to back it up, but I would imagine like the touchdown shares for the Saints are more dispersed than they are by far for the average team. So I don't know. That's just me. Alvin Kamara still held on to his role as a receiver with those 6 targets, just 9 yards though against a good running back defense. Ran 9 times, so 21 adjusted opportunities in a blowout. He did have 4 red zone carries. Latavius Murray had just 1. Murray did have 10 carries overall, but that split was 7-3 in the first half in favor of Kamara. So Kamara's unchanged for me now. I'm not worrying about any of this. Something to keep an eye on though is Marshawn Lattimore got hurt, but did return to the sideline, didn't come back into the game. So he hasn't been his usual self, but at least according to Pro Football Focus, I don't know. I don't watch the film. I just wanted to let that be known.
I've never watched a football game in my life.
Yeah, if it's not in red zone, I don't want to get that all 22 stuff out of here. New Orleans hosts the 49ers next week. And then for the Buccaneers, not a whole lot to dig into. You would think that we would have seen a lot from like a lot to go off of with the pass catchers, but the debut of Antonio Brown didn't go very well. Just 46 total plays here. Tom Brady, who apparently goes to bed at 8:30, which I really, really respect, but I saw on Twitter that he goes to bed at 8:30.
Yeah, Chris Raybon tweeted this, and he's like, "Is this why they struggle in primetime?" And I kind of don't hate the theory.
I mean, I can't.
I don't hate it.
Yeah, but one of the worst net expected points games I've seen on not a whole lot of dropbacks. Negative 0.42 passing net expected points per dropback on 38 attempts. 3 picks, no touchdowns. Was just 1 of 5 on downfield attempts.
He went full Danucci.
Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette, Rob Gronkowski all had 6 targets. I almost missed Gronkowski because the NFL.com notes, I think they sort by like yardage, and he had, I think 1 catch for 2 yards. Antonio Brown had 5 targets. Ronald Jones had 4. If you look at the pass routes, which is probably the most important here for this new look team, according to Pro Football Focus, Chris Godwin ran 43 pass routes. Mike Evans was at 40, and Antonio Brown was at 36. According to NFL.com, the snap rates were 94% for Godwin, 86% for Evans, 78% for Antonio Brown. Downfield targets, according to numberFire, 3 for Godwin, 1 for Brown, none for Evans. So I think with Godwin leading most of those fairly comfortably, he's the top option of the 3. Evans is now hard to justify without a lot of volume overall and a lack of downfield work. Brown played more snaps than I would have expected, wasn't necessarily disproportionately involved relative to those, but I think that maybe Godwin's the only one I could really feel confident in right now. And then this is secondary in the backfield, but Leonard Fournette played 66% of snaps. Ronald Jones 32%. It was negative script from the start, but it's the 3rd straight week where Fournette has played the majority of the snaps. And they play the Panthers next week, which is where we usually want to look for running backs, but I'm not quite there yet with Fournette.
I'm not either, but I'm going to at least give him a long, hard look. I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't, but he is my vice. So, yeah, I think that you're right on the Buccaneers receivers where we put Godwin first and then kind of just, whatever from there. I am maybe a tiny bit higher on Brees just because I think there is at least a path to him being decent. He just needs the other team to keep pace because 0.24 passing net expected points per dropback against this defense is really good. He's been putting up decent fantasy totals recently, despite having no Michael Thomas, no Emmanuel Sanders, and stuff like that. So he's $7,600.
Do you know his max FanDuel point output this year?
23.8.
23.68.
Okay,
you yelled at me
just
so
looking
much.
at it. No, but okay.
You yelled at me so much for Jimmy Garoppolo saying.
But how many of those games have included Michael Thomas against a bad defense? 0. Not a single one. So I think that there are building blocks for a ceiling, and he's $7,600. I think stock is up on Drew Brees, and I think that he is no longer someone I am unwilling to consider.
Maybe. Maybe we'll have to talk about him in detail on Thursday. But
it might be tough because I don't know if San Francisco can keep pace.
Look, I know the salary's low for him, but like Herbert's 8,000, Deshaun's 83. Like we got a lot of good quarterbacks on that slate. Carson Wentz is 75.
I thought you were talking about good quarterbacks.
That was a joke.
Deshaun at 83, I think, is the best argument against Brees of the ones you presented. Are you worried about this Bucs offense?
Because
it kind of just felt like a bad game.
It was a bad game.
Kind of a bad game against New York last week too, but
bad game. And now with Brown there and Gronkowski trending up in terms of what he's getting, this team went from it was Godwin and Evans. Now it's Godwin, then like Evans, Brown, Gronkowski all getting involved. It's very different. Jameis isn't there to throw for 500 air yards a game. It's Tom Brady, who I guess can't play after 8 o'clock at night. They play 1 o'clock next week, so
okay.
I guess that's different. But I am down on them.
Yeah.
There's not a single – like last year, we would have to kind of build around what we were doing with the Buccaneers receivers. This is not the same.
Fournette $6,400, which is high enough to get me to stay away. So thank you, FanDuel, for jacking up the salary line of Fournette to save me from myself. I appreciate it. That is all that we have for today. But as mentioned, we are back later today right here on the FanDuel YouTube page to preview the Masters from a DFS perspective, breaking down our favorite golfers in each salary tier for Augusta. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page to get a notification as we go live again, 3 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page and posted on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after. The NFL Listener League is FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. Should be posted today. The PGA Listener League is already up. FanDuel.com/league/PGA Listener League. I'll put a link to that in the podcast post up on numberFire as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I'm at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you, as always, to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Hopefully Week 9 was kind to you. Hopefully we'll talk to you again later today for the Masters. But until then, good luck with your DFS lineups. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.